The bodies of both Anthony and Micheal Spilotro showed very similar injuries. The injuries were primarily blunt force injuries. They were about the head, the neck, and the chest, and to some extent the extremities. There was injury to the neck, but no evidence that there was actually a strangulation.
Do you think the bodies were in the grave for what period of time?
The bodies had been in the grave for several days, at least a week, and possibly longer.
We're worried about...
You guys got to cut it out, I'm warning you now, all right?
Tony Spilotro's winning streak in court was unparalleled in the ranks of organized crime. But lately, even Spilotro had to wonder about his future. Along with a 17-count trial which had ended in a mistrial, there was a separate murder trial slated. And a case implicating Spilotro in skimming from Las Vegas casinos was also waiting in the wings. All of the other defendants in the skimming case were convicted. Spilotro would eventually be linked to as many as 25 mob-related killings. Witnesses died. Spilotro never did suffer a conviction for a violent crime. By the time Spilotro made his move to Las Vegas, it would make the evening news in Chicago.
A man by the name of Tony Spilotro has attracted the attention of law enforcement officials, some of whom think Spilotro is the most cunning and dangerous member of the crime syndicate.
In 1963, Spilotro was accused of the murder of a loan shark. Spilotro was acquitted when his co-defendant was shotgunned to death. In 1979, Spilotro suffered 2 convictions for filing a false loan application. The sentence, a $1 fine. In 1974, Spilotro was arrested here in Las Vegas for murder. The case was dropped. Later that year, Spilotro was accused of defrauding the Teamsters Union. All of the defendants, including some of the top men in the Chicago mob, were acquitted after the untimely death of the prosecution's star witness. A 1981 racketeering case is still pending in court. Prosecutors were appealing that case. In 1983, Spilotro was tried for the torture murder of 2 Chicago street punks. He was acquitted. There were at least 15 other arrests, not a single conviction. Law enforcement officials had yet to beat Spilotro in court. A longtime Chicago mob observer reported,
"Some predict Tony will take a big fall someday, but it hasn't happened yet."
Armed life ended last week. If the killers follow true to form of most mob hits, Spilotro's murderers will likely go unpunished.
Anthony Spilotro, Tough Tony, Tony the Ant. In a town rightly or wrongly labeled as an organized crime stronghold, it was Spilotro who personified the public perception of mob influence and underworld style. The FBI tailed him for a decade, trying to put together a case that would put Spilotro behind bars. In the end, it may have been former friends and allies who took Tony off the streets permanently, perhaps making law enforcement's job easier.
I think that his passing now will probably have an effect of somewhat of a deterrent in lessening the crime rate here in Las Vegas.
Federal authorities believe that Chicago underworld leaders entrusted Las Vegas to Spilotro to supervise loan sharking, burglary rings, extortion, and other rackets. Ferran says operations will be disrupted without an iron-fisted boss man.
Some victims may, victims being those who borrowed the money, may find themselves getting a pass because there is nobody here to collect. There may also be individuals at a lower level than was Spilotro and others who may still be around collecting. Mr. Spilotro's death now leaves the alleged overseer of Las Vegas spot vacant.
Ferran explains that with dozens of crime figures from Chicago, New York, and other cities recently convicted or indicted, there may be a shortage of mob men available who could run Las Vegas's rackets as profitably and as efficiently as federal authorities believe Spilotro did.
As the bodies of Anthony and Micheal Spilotro were finally released by authorities, the families of the reputed mobsters learned that the Chicago Archdiocese has forbidden a public church funeral. It's not the first time church officials here have taken that stand where organized crime is involved. To avoid scandalizing the faithful, Joseph Little Caesar DeVarco was denied a public mass last January, but DeVarco had been found guilty of racketeering and died while in federal custody. Most observers think the decision is based more on Anthony Spilotro's reputation as the mob's man in Las Vegas. The parish where Micheal Spilotro was a member has been flooded with phone calls. Even the pastor disagrees with the attempt to avoid scandal.
All I can do is to actually empathize with the family, and I offer to say a memorial mass at a subsequent date if they would like me to do so.
The Archdiocese states that this is not a judgment about eternal salvation, nor about moral guilt or innocence, that it is seeking to respect both the needs of the family and the needs of the entire church community. Funeral services without the public mass are scheduled for Friday.